show up every day and just start contributing. And I think that was a testament to what I was doing at the time when I realized like I wanted to go full time into crypto. Is like just show up day in, day out. Don't worry about like what your friends are doing, how much money they're making, anything like that. Just stay dialed in and do you and like pursue your path.
Yeah, I do not wear my heart on my sleeve. I cannot let them see in too deep, cause I know they can use it against me. Only one I can trust is me. I got niggas I keep around me.
Episode 35 with Lucas from Pods. Today we're here to talk about the future of Onchain Media as the partner that's helped us put all of our tokenized podcasts on-chain today. We talk about our background graduating college together, everything from ICOs to DeFi and NFTs. We cover his journey as a founder, working at Bankless, and much, much more. As a reminder, you can collect this episode on investinmusic.xyz. Starting this week, we're going to be giving a shout out to the top 3 collectors, so make sure to head on over there. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Episode 35 with Lucas of Pods. We are back. We got Lucas Campbell of Pods, the day one in the building. Lucas, how are you feeling today, man?
Feeling phenomenal. Stoked to be here.
Lucas, I know that you and I have had quite the background together, and we're going to get into all of it. But before we do, I know that there's an exciting new chapter that you recently embarked on. A lot of the reason why we're having this episode today. What have you been up to lately?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people that might know me from the past probably know about my time at Bankless, where I spearheaded the newsletter for about 3 years, worked with Ryan and David pretty closely, and helped build Bankless as a media company. But as of about 6-7 months ago, I took a step back from Bankless to pursue Pods, which is a new platform for on-chain podcast, or dare I say podcast NFTs, where we're helping podcast creators open up this new monetization and engagement and analytics model for podcasting as a whole. So been spending the past 6-7 months doing that and building this heads down. And happy to kind of dive into it a little bit more, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing for us. So for those who don't know, we've been using Pods as the way that we are tokenizing all of our podcasts. And I know that you recently just went through the Seed Club program, which is something that I'm also a big fan of. Can you talk a little bit more about that experience and then what kind of the output of that was with the demo day and the podcast that you guys tokenized there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we applied for the Seed Club's accelerator program, SCO6, which was like their 6th cohort doing an accelerator. I think there was about like 300 something applications, and we were fortunate enough to be one of the 10 or 12 projects that got selected for the accelerator. This is about 8 to 10 week, maybe 12 week program, about 2 to 3 months, where we would work with Jess and Josh, who are the 2 founders of Seed Club, closely and just kind of do like office hours with them. They would help us with our product direction, and they'd also bring in, some sort of industry leader, whether it was like Ryan Hooper, I think, from Product Hunt, and a couple other people just to chat about their experience building in Web3 and startups as a whole. So yeah, it was about an 8 to 12 week program, super valuable. And then this culminated in a demo day, probably the most entertaining demo day that I've seen. But we showcased Pods, debuted an episode of Seed Club, building at the edges, exclusively on demo day. And that was kind of like the start of Pods as a platform. Obviously, we'd been doing some stuff on the back end with you guys and Invest in Music. But yeah, the event and demo day with Seed Club was definitely the debut of Pods and kind of our more foot forward into a public-facing position.
So I want to spend most of this episode talking about on-chain media, why you're so excited about it, why you think that people should be collecting, why you should be tokenizing your episodes. But before we go down that rabbit hole, I want to start with your background because I think that you and I have had a very unique journey that has led us to this point in time. Obviously, I want to talk more about you being a founder, but before we do that, take me back to your earliest relationship with crypto. What got you into the space? For those who don't know about you before Bankless, give me the rundown.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was attending the University of Colorado Boulder, studying economics, was very interested in finance and investing at the time, and kind of went down the crypto rabbit hole in spring of 2017 amid the ICO mania, and just fell down that rabbit hole completely and was at a juxtaposition, where I was entering my senior year and wanted to, was trying to figure out whether I wanted to pursue, traditional finance, go work at like a Fidelity or something and do that, or, risk it for the biscuit and go into crypto. And I decided to kind of double down and try and do this crypto thing that my parents thought I was crazy. And I was a senior at the University of Colorado, and one of the things that happened was like there was this old ICO like hedge fund called Crush Crypto, and they held like this massive application like contest of for a research analyst position. And I'd spent like 2 weeks writing this research report, submitted it, they announced it, and they go, "Oh, from the University of Colorado, Kieran O'Day." And I was like, "Who the fuck is this guy?" Kieran O'Day was actually the president of the CU Blockchain Club, and I realized that I was a little bit behind the ball, and I needed to attend this blockchain club and get involved with the community. So I attended one of the meetings in January, and that's kind of where I met you and the rest of the CU Blockchain Club, and that was kind of the beginning of the end where. You were doing some like high level consulting for some projects at the time and needed some help. And I kind of jumped on board and just like was trying to get involved in whatever way possible. And we started working together, over the years in like 2018, 2019, working for ICOs, mostly for free at the time. But yeah, we were just trying to make a name for ourselves, build a reputation, trying to understand this technology and just be helpful in whatever ways possible. And that kind of transpired into DeFi Rate, which was like a blog that we had started Coop back in the day with Kendall Seville, obviously big proponent, big backer of that blog. But we were covering DeFi in 2019, early 2020, kind of when the Uniswaps and makers, the synthetics were just getting off the ground. And that was, that was kind of the most part of the journey. And then, we did that for about a year and a half. And then Sean Adams DM'd me one weekend and was like, "Hey, love your writing. You want to come work or like come do some stuff for me?" And that was the beginning of the end on the Bankless journey. And worked with them for about 3 years. And that was that's kind of the summary,
Yeah, I want to unpack it because there's so many different stories to pull out of that. I would say one of the earliest ones I want to highlight is that you as a writer in the space was always the thing that I think separated you from the rest of the people that were in the industry. I remember that you covered, tokenizing Fortnite back in 2017, way before any of the on-chain gaming stuff had come to fruition. I remember you had a Bitcoin halving article that went relatively viral within the small pocket that we were in. And I guess I'm curious to hear from more of a foundational standpoint, like what got you interested in covering crypto as a whole? Like when you're in your senior year of college, what even put crypto on your radar that made you think this is something you wanted to spend time on?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I was very much into like finance and economics, and I think the concept of this new technology that allowed anyone anywhere in the world to transact for a few pennies was really powerful. And not only that, but you could also build applications that wasn't just send and receive money, but maybe you can lend, borrow, stake, all these sorts of things. There was an endless application or endless design space for applications on crypto, and that paired with the fact that it was like this really young nascent industry that I could go and make an impact in after 2-3 years, whereas like comparatively you go into finance, it's going to take you a decade to break into that industry and like make a name for yourself. So I just felt it was like super compelling. I also loved to ski and wanted to work remotely, and I felt like crypto was a very digitally nomadic, digitally forward industry, and was very friendly to remote work. So that was kind of maybe the cherry on top, is that I could do all this stuff, work in this amazing industry, but also do it just from my laptop anywhere in the world. And I thought that was really compelling.
And I want to make an analog here to, the quote unquote starving artists, where in music you basically have a bunch of people who are super passionate about being an artist, about releasing music, but they don't know how to make a living on the back of it. Lucas and I were basically starving crypto people, for lack of a better term. This is a senior year of college, coming out of school. I definitely didn't have any idea what I wanted to do with my career, but I knew that there was an industry here that was exciting to me. Like I felt very compelled by the conversations we were having, by the people that we were spending time with, but turning it into a career was definitely no easy achievement. And I would say in a lot of ways, you and I basically just struggled for 3 years all throughout a bear market just to find any ways to get paid to even be doing work on chain in the first place. And I guess I'm curious to hear from your perspective, what are some of the earliest memories you have about making money for being involved in the crypto space as a professional?
Yeah, I think the earliest ones had to be probably like doing some like one-off consulting stuff where we were able to get like some payments. But I think it really started hitting a stride for us when we were getting like contracts for, you get paid 20 cents per word that you write, and we would just hammer out articles, like just nonstop, whatever we could write about, we would write about, because we had this, incentive where it was like fixed dollar per word, and you could like really make, a living off of that. And I think that was one of the moments where not only did we actually like we're able to build a steady income for ourselves, but also simultaneously we're learning. We're learning and covering all these awesome projects that are just at the forefront, and we're also building a reputation for ourselves. Like if you're a non-technical person and you don't know how to write code, writing blogs, starting a podcast, anything like that is definitely the best thing that you can do. And every cent that we wrote down, every word or cent that we earned for every word that we wrote down helped build our reputation just a little bit. And it was really cool to cover like UMA or something, right? When they were first getting involved, and then like have Heartlamber like retweet it and be like, "Hey, awesome article!" Like those kind of like moments, or when we did that synthetics discounted to cash flow, Kane Warwick literally emailed us after and was like, "This is one of the best like analysis on SNX that we've seen." And I think those were just like super powerful moments. It was less about the money and more about like these reputational experiences that it was like, "Hey, we're on the right track." Even like, yeah, I remember Vitalik retweeted or like tweeted out our Gitcoin grants article because we analyzed like how like money was being spent and allocated in Gitcoin grants. And I think those moments were definitely the most powerful for me as a whole, like knowing that we were on the right track. At this time we weren't making a ton of money, we weren't getting like all this stuff, but we were reputationally, socially, I think we're making like a ton of strides and like progress and improvements on that front. And I thought that was super valuable and stood out for me.
Yeah, and I think it's important to highlight sort of the growth in our maturity of knowing which content to cover. And we're going to tie this all back to Onchain Media and why I think it's so important. But just to kind of highlight this, you mentioned one-off payments for consulting. Let's break that down in terms of what that meant. You would find a random ICO on AngelList with the founder that heard that you could raise $20 million by selling a shitcoin online. They knew nothing about the space, and so they turned to two college kids in the form of me and Lucas to say, "Teach me about crypto." And so the way that we would get paid, which most of the time did not happen, but in the rare times it did, was write me a business plan that I can use to go and raise millions of dollars on the back of these ideas that I probably don't even know how to execute. And so this is really where Lucas and I honed in on our 10,000 hours of writing, was just writing white paper after white paper after white paper of trying to help these founders materialize their vision of what they wanted to do, but also kind of put it in this package of making it palatable to ICO traders who had a very distinct knowledge around tokenomics, around the channels to market, around the ways that you should phrase your product launches, your roadmap, etc. And so basically, Lucas and I were just writing business plans for the most random businesses you could ever think of, just to be able to make the smallest amount of money to keep moving the needle forward. And why I think that's important.
Money, but like the chance to make the money, because we were doing token allocations at the time, and I don't think any of those projects that we worked with in 18-19 ended up launching their tokens. Like it wasn't the right environment and whatnot. So we were, we were just, betting on the pie in the sky, hoping that it would come into fruition.
And I think it did come into a lot of fruition because, again, I want to just like stick in this pocket because I think your and I journey informs so much of what we're doing today. We basically went from writing white papers for random ICOs that never launched to then going, okay, how do we cover projects that are actually making meaningful traction in the space? And this was DeFi Summer at the time, which then turned into on-chain governance. And I want to spend some time here because I think for a lot of our listeners that are in music or NFTs or culture more broadly, they're probably not as familiar with like what governance is. And I think it's really important to stick here for a second because it played such a pivotal role in our journey. Talk to me a little bit more about the work that we would do around on-chain governance forums, working with these DeFi protocols, and how our involvement changed from just being like coverage of an article to actually helping to inform the way that these projects operated from a very high level.
Yeah. So we do we have a small organization called FireEyes that helps work with small project teams on governance and token economics. And I think like a lot of the learnings that we had when we were writing all these blogs really just gave us the knowledge and like the background to understand all of these projects on a pretty deep level. And then we can take best practices from all of these projects and apply them to new projects that are still, trying to find their product market fit, or like trying to identify how to solve this governance issue or anything like that. So really the writing provided like all of the context that we needed to just like extrapolate from and apply to these new projects that were kind of going through similar problems or similar parallels, and just being able to apply that knowledge and that experience that we've seen, like, oh, MakerDAO did XYZ, 2 years ago, it didn't really work. You guys are having this same issue, maybe let's not try that and go down that path. Let's try like this. And I think, all that writing that we did over the years for DeFi Rating, covering DeFi Summer, along with like our token Tuesday's newsletter, which was like a newsletter covering token economics, really just provided us with the context and the background to just like take best practices from all the projects in the space and apply them moving forward. And I think that was definitely a big part of it. In addition to, obviously having James, Callum, and the rest of the FireEyes guys like involved in like having their network and their fight, I think was very really valuable for us as a whole.
Totally. And that was a pivotal moment for me in my career because we basically went from being on the outside and covering these projects as journalists to when we teamed up with James and Callum, we started to actually work with these projects as, back to our old roots, like consultants more or less, right? Like we were meeting with these teams on a regular basis. We were giving them suggestions on tokenomics, rebranding, marketing, go to market. And it felt a lot less like we were just retroactively covering things that were happening after the fact. We were almost like creating the playbooks for them to go and execute against. And I'm curious to hear from your perspective, what are some of those memories you have from working with teams like, Super Rare, Gitcoin, Optimism, ENS? We could list a laundry list of projects that we were helpful with at the time, but what were some of your core memories about the work that we did in that phase in your life?
Yeah, I think like one of the big ones for us was like the RPL and designing those token economics. Like RPL was just an ICO that was trying to build out liquid staking. ETH staking didn't even exist, but we were trying to figure out what an ideal token model would look like when all of this was live. And I think that was a really interesting thought experiment. I mean, hats off to James and Callum because I know they spent a lot of their time trying to just decipher the existing system and how to like plug in a token into it. But I think that was one of the core memories of like, for me, because it was actually us like doing the thing that I dreamed of doing in college, which was like going to these sick, awesome projects and helping design their token economic systems in something that is like value accretive for everyone, right? As protocol usage goes up, demand for that token goes up, and how to design a system that's actually fruitful and advantageous was like definitely the big open loop there. I think outside of that, like doing all the token economic stuff, designing airdrops, I think was really cool and really interesting. We worked with like Super Rare, Gitcoin, ENS to help design those airdrops, to allocate them properly to the user base, pretty much getting this massive data set of like, hey, this is all our usage, here's the ETH volume, like, all this, stuff. Let's take this data set and make it into something actionable for an airdrop. So like how do we reward the most powerful users, I think was really interesting, and just spending hours and hours in spreadsheets just trying to like plug and play. And like even Super Rare, I think we were making adjustments up until like the last like 36 hours of that airdrop or like that token going live. So I think those kind of memories and just being on the behind the scenes on how the sausage is made for some of the biggest projects in the space, I think was really interesting and just obviously very valuable for us. But yeah, I'm curious like what your favorite experience was or like biggest one was.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely echo the airdrop sentiment. And I would say the way that those airdrops got communicated was also very fascinating to me. So like when you had that main tweet that said like, this token is live, go and claim your allocation. You had the pie chart that showed the breakdown of the token. You had all of the different mechanics that were being used to distribute it. I just feel like we all had such a clear role in terms of how that came to life. And just looking back on it in hindsight, it's pretty crazy that 20-something-year-old kids were working with these multi-billion-dollar projects to allocate hundreds of millions of dollars of tokens around to different actors of those ecosystems. Now, you could argue that what those tokens do is still to be figured out. And I think that in a lot of ways, the industry is trying to figure out like what actually makes these things valuable beyond the hype of whatever meta or cycle we're in as a whole. But I don't know, for me, I just found it it was the first real taste I had of like working at a company or in like a company dynamic, because same as you, I never had a full-time job coming out of college. Like I was always just doing freelance work on the internet, doing consulting, doing journalism, etc. And when we work with these teams to actually launch, a new protocol upgrade or an airdrop or whatever it might be, that felt like the closest that we got to the source of what it means to be working with a company on a major moment. And I think that seeing the whole of it was just the most inspiring to me, of feeling like we were really close to doing something very meaningful for those projects.
Absolutely. I think Richard Chen released a dashboard the other week, and it was like total value distributed by airdrops, and like ENS was 1.2 billion, Optimism was 240 million. Like we're already deep into like 10 figures at this point, in airdrops that we were like helping design. Obviously most of the credit goes to these founding teams that spent the past years and years building these projects from the ground up. But it was like super interesting and valuable to just come in when they're having their moment or thinking about having that moment of launching a token and just like providing that context that we've learned when we did 5 other of these. I think it was super valuable as a whole, and just like such a unique experience to this day.
Yeah, and to add on to that, not only our experience from launching the airdrops, but also just being active users on chain, having been using all these DeFi protocols, using all these applications. I'd say a lot of our role is basically just telling these founders, like, what's going on the ground floor, like what's happening deep in the weeds. If you're a project founder that's spending all of your time running a full company, which is a full-time job in and of itself, we were kind of the voice that's saying, like, here's how people are reacting to X, Y, and Z sentiment. Here's why people would be triggered if you allocated this amount to the team versus this amount to the DAO. And just small things that were hard to quantify from like a very tangible numeric perspective to much more of like a qualitative, like here's the general vibe and sentiment of the community. I think that that's really relevant to this conversation, because I want to start going into like the evolution of where your career evolved from that. And one of my favorite moments to kind of highlight here was, I remember DeFi summer, peak DeFi activity, all this crazy stuff's happening. I buy a CryptoPunk for 1 ETH, and you just gave me the most shit about it of all time. You're like, what are you doing? Why are you buying this thing? DeFi tokens are the shit right now. Like, what are you doing with NFTs? So talk to me about the transition from DeFi to NFTs, because I think this starts to get us closer towards on-chain media and kind of where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that transition threw me off guard, and I think for a lot of people it was the same thing. Like, I remember Ryan and David, during that same time were like, why would anyone care about NFTs? Like, they had barely done podcasts on it. So I think to me, I've never been a collector of, historically in my life. I've been more finance, economics focused. But this paradigm of like NFTs and realizing that you can represent any sort of work digitally with verifiable scarcity, I think is really powerful. And that doesn't just, come in the form of computer energy like Bitcoin or capital like Ethereum, but it also can come in artwork or music or videos or podcasts or any sort of form of work, right? Can be tokenized and represented digitally with verifiable scarcity. And I think that's really powerful as a concept as a whole, that I think I was skeptical on or didn't fully realize when you were buying your CryptoPunk, and I was NGMI to that. But I think it was the beginning of the rabbit hole. And I think where it really clicked with me was when we were at Breakpoint Solana in 2021. And we were at a house with you, James Callum, and Blockchain Brett. And we went down this like content NFT rabbit hole. And that's where I got pilled on music. And once I got pilled on music, I was like, okay, this can actually just extrapolate or extend into any other form of media, right? It is all the same thing as someone's creative work being represented as an NFT. And it doesn't matter if it's art, if it's music, if it's a podcast, if it's, a video. All of it has value, right? It inherently has value as creative work that, you see today, like Mr. Beast getting millions and millions of views. Like, that work is valuable, not just for advertisers, but just inherently valuable, right? That creative work is valuable. And I think that is something that NFTs unlock, is for us to actually value the work itself and not just what the advertisers are willing to pay for it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that process was so interesting to me, because you had spent so much time writing about tokens and just being a journalist and whatnot, that when it started to come to NFTs, I want to highlight that it was a very different shift. Like, something that we would do internally during our Fire Eyes calls, we would have quote unquote shitcoin corner, which would basically be, we would just talk about whatever tokens were doing well at the time, why they were doing well, why the sentiment was happening the way it was. You had sites like CoinMarketCap, CoinGecko, etc. And I just want to highlight quickly the shift from ERC20 tokens on Uniswap to NFTs on OpenSea. It felt like it was a very different playbook. And the ways that you started to trade those markets was not by going to CoinMarketCap or going to CoinGecko and then going to Uniswap. It was instead, you were on Twitter and you saw this collection, and you would either go and mint it directly from a website, or you would go to OpenSea and trade it from a very different form factor. Talk to me a little bit more about how you started to shift your mentality as a trader and as an active user of on-chain products as it started to shift from DeFi being the main focus to NFTs being the main focus.
Yeah, I think like everything else in crypto, price is the best advertiser or marketer. And when everything in NFTs are blowing up and DeFi is going down, like, I think naturally, as someone that's crypto curious as a whole, you're going to see what the hell's going on in NFTs and why price is going up. And I think that idea, or just like the concept of there was a bull market happening in crypto and it wasn't in the area that I was in, made it attractive to at least peek into it and just understand what the hell's going on here. So I definitely attribute that CryptoPunk that you bought for 1 ETH, started selling for 15, 20, it just started going up. And I was like, what the hell's going on? And you see like Bored Apes start going up. All these random things like, that started just popping up left and right. You can also just sense it, I think, as a whole when you're like deep into the crypto industry, just where the momentum is, and like understand this is the place that I have to be in right now if I want to make money as like, even just as a trader. This is where the money's being made, and just understanding that and recognizing that, I think is always something that's good. Just to have that open mind and understand that like the place that you've been specializing in for the past like 2 years might not be relevant for the next 6 months if you want to, continue to like make gains and make money as an investor or trader. But yeah, I think the NFT mania, NFT summer in 2021, I think, right? Was it? Was definitely like more of had my trader hat on. And I don't think it was until I got to music that I really had my investor or like long-term holder, kind of long-term perspective hat on. Whereas, we had talked about this for years and years, but like I had found, Jack Harlow when he was, in 2018, he had like less than 50,000 listeners. I had found Russ, a lot of like different rappers, smaller rappers that ended up blowing up, and I had no upside in that. And I saw that that opportunity with music and music NFTs, and being able to own this work allows you to kind of have upside in that creator. And I think that holds true across, every single vertical, whether it is that PFP or whether it is music or a podcast like this one. Understanding that you can be there early, have on-chain verified proof of being early like that, and being able to capitalize on any of the upside that creator might drive towards his audience, I think is really powerful and something uniquely enabled in Web3.
Yeah, 100%. And I want to pull out a couple of things from what you just said there. The first being, I posted on Farcast the other day saying one of the challenging parts about crypto is that there's always a new trend and a new meta that you kind of want to follow. Like, especially as a founder, someone that's really deep in the weeds, the best thing you could have done during 2020 to 2021 was literally sell 100% of your DeFi tokens and put it all into NFTs. But you have this sort of like emotional attachment to DeFi because in the context of our conversation, we had launched these tokens, we were active on all these governance forums, but you started to notice the momentum leaving the DeFi projects and going into the NFT projects. And there becomes this psychological question you have to ask yourself of like, do I stay where I put my time and energy in the past, or do I go to where the current momentum and energy is in the present? And I think that's something that I've struggled with a lot, because when you go to the current momentum and energy, all of the time that's been spent in the past feels like it's getting neglected or not being valued. And I'm curious to hear for you, as someone that was working for Bankless at the time, how did you start to shift the way that you were spending your time on the Bankless project, knowing that the meta was changing from DeFi, which is like Bankless's bread and butter, to NFTs?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, at the time, we were just covering more NFT stuff. Like, I was the lead editor at Bankless. I was shipping the newsletter 6 days a week, and we just have to build the content around it. So I think I was in a very fortunate position where like it was part of my job to be in the moment and understand what the hell's going on and covering that and making sure that the content is reflecting the current status of like the crypto industry, right? So I think for me personally, I was just in a unique position where it was my job to cover what was hot in crypto and make sure that I'm building a content schedule that reflects that. So yeah, I think that's the answer. Maybe not the one we were hoping for, but I think I was just like in a unique position to be able to capitalize on that stuff.
Well, I think it dovetails nicely, because I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about Bankless Collectibles and your role in bringing that to life, because I think that also is a very nice lead into what you're working on now.
Absolutely. So we kind of talked about that like Solana Breakpoint conference in 2021, and we went down that like content NFT rabbit hole. I was still at Bankless at the time, and I had tried to convey these thoughts and these ideas to Ryan and David. And I was trying to tell them, I was like, all of our content should be on chain. We should be monetizing our content by selling them as NFTs, allow our community to own them. I think this could be really powerful. And I think rightfully so, they were very skeptical and they kind of brushed it off for a long time. Fast forward like a year later, almost a year ago today, pretty much, give or take, they finally were like, hey, Lucas, you're right. Well, let's try these content NFTs. Let's try releasing our podcast as NFTs. And I think one of the things that was big or like selling point there was, I was like, Ryan, David, like, you see Sound XYZ right now doing really well. And these music NFTs are the exact same thing as a podcast. Just one is 2 to 5 minutes long. The other one's 30 to 50, an hour long, or whatever it is. It's just the length. And, obviously the content itself is different, but you still have the same medium at the end of the day. And we could do really well here. Like this market is showing a really strong sign of life in the middle of a bear market. I think we should try and see what we can do there. And I think that was the tipping point for them. Is like, okay, like music's working right now. Let's just try the podcast. Let's see what happens. And released Bankless Collectibles, which was the first instantiation of these podcast NFTs, where we released 5 episodes from the Bankless archive as limited edition collectibles. We sold 100 editions. I think in total across 5 weeks, we sold all 5 episodes in less than 10 Ethereum blocks. So it was about like 2 minutes in total. And we just had a ton of interest from our collector community, from other creators that were like, how can we do this? All sorts of stuff. So that was kind of the beginning of pods, and the genesis of pods was we just had so much, demand and interest across the board from collectors and creators about these podcast NFTs that we had just kind of duct taped together the tech stack for Bankless. And yeah, at the time I'd been there for about 3 years and was ready for something new. And I think that this was like an opportunity that just unfolded, at the right time when I had the right experience, the right network. And yeah, I think I've been pilled on this idea of on-chain media and content NFTs for well over 2 years. And I've been thinking incessantly about it, to be quite frank, all the time, and just opening up this new monetization and engagement model for creators. Because when I was at Bankless, like, look, every single crypto media company is a Web 2 media company talking about Web 3. All of them are talking the talk. This is not specific to any single one. All of them are talking the talk. They're running the exact same playbook that every other media company has been doing for the past 10 to 20 years. And you can actually use this technology that you're talking all day about to rethink these business models for media. And that was kind of the whole thesis at Bankless. I was like, guys, we need to be walking the walk here, and figuring out how to leverage crypto technologies, how to leverage NFTs to rethink the business model for media. And one of those easy layups is just like, let's put the content on chain, sell them as NFTs. And I think that is a really powerful concept, one, for monetization, and two, because it provides a new avenue for your collectors to engage with the work that you're creating, and not only engage with it, but to get to own it, right? By releasing your content on chain, you're effectively creating like a trading card game for your content, where people can buy that and trade it. And, the design space becomes wide open, where these creators can actually design the game around these trading cards, right? And I think that's really powerful and something very unique, that is way better than just like advertisers, right? Like people shilling, whatever product is willing to pay them the most. Like, I think that kind of just blatantly sucks as a model. And I think we can do a lot better, and we can use technology like crypto to do that.
How much of that demand do you think was because of the time and place of when they were selling versus people having an innate demand to want to collect the content on chain?
I think it was definitely both. Definitely for Bankless at that time, like we had released the SBF episode, which was like, this was all amid the FTX, collapse. We had recorded that debate with Eric Voorhees and SBF. Eric Voorhees absolutely slaughtered the guy. And that was just a very collectible episode, right? And to attribute that to the moment in time, probably very relevant considering FTX was going down. But also today, I would collect the F out of that piece of content, right? Like, it was just very collectible. So I think to answer your question, had to be like 50-50. And then the rest of the episodes that we released were just Bankless favorites that people like would listen to over and over again, like the Crypto Renaissance, which was something that they had released in, May of 2020, and became one of like the all-time favorite episodes within the community, because it just was like very collectible. And I think that aspect of it definitely drew people in. But I think the timing in the market with the FTX meltdown and how we positioned it also was to attribute to a lot of the success there.
And then talk to me about your transition from running Bankless Collectibles to spinning out pods and kind of becoming a founder. Because I think there is obviously a difference between you running the content playbook for one organization versus designing a platform that's meant to cater to all creators more broadly.
Yeah, I think it's been a very interesting journey over the past 6 to 8 months. I think as a whole, it's a different beast. Running a company is very different than running a small project within the company. Being responsible for, end to end, being a founder and being in a leadership role and setting up, payroll and going out and raising money. All of that stuff is something that I didn't get experience at Bankless, but was something that like I was prepared to do and, had the chops to do it. But I think, it's very different to, be on your own and being in a leadership position versus, I love them, but like having Ryan and David as like your dads that you can go to and like, talk to and reference. You don't have that when you're being a founder of a new platform, regardless of what it is. If you're a founder, you're kind of responsible for the decisions. You don't really have many people to go to and be like, hey, was this a good or bad decision? You just have to make those. And I think that transition has been definitely very interesting, but also really empowering. I think it's been just amazing to have the accountability, have the leadership, have the responsibility of like shipping this and building this platform and talking to creators and all of this stuff that comes into, building a platform like Pods, where, I'll just pause there because I'm going on a tangent, but.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of dovetails we can take on the back of that. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the way that you built Pods, because I know that there was some design decisions made about the way that you're tokenizing media, et cetera. But before we go there, I want to highlight the shift that happened with NFTs over the last year, let's call it, where it went from being 100 editions of a limited edition collection to more of this sort of open edition phenomenon, forever mints as we're seeing it now. Talk to me a little bit more about the transition from collectibles being highly scarce, high value price points, to now this new meta that seems to be more around open editions, free mints, et cetera.
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting transition. I don't think like those fixed editions, limited high price are out of the scope at all. I think that there's still a time and a place for them. But I think, one, frankly, people don't want to part away with, half an or like 0.1 ETH, anymore to mint an NFT. But I think the shift to, open editions, forever editions has shifted towards like a patronage plus model, where you really just love this creator a lot and you want to support that creator. And these NFTs are kind of the vehicle to do that. But in return, you're not just getting like a one-way payment like you're doing on Patreon or something where you're just like putting in your credit card information. You're actually receiving the work itself, on top of that, in addition to whatever benefits that creator might append to those NFTs. But yeah, I think that's the through line, is it's shifting towards a patronage plus model that's more open towards collectors and being able to support someone at a cheaper price point and not spending, $300. Because when you do those fixed editions, you're almost, you're intending for like some sort of speculation on it, of the sense of like people are expecting money, and if they don't make money off like the last mint, they're not going to come to the next one, right? And if you're releasing content 1x a week and the person didn't make a 3x, in that week, you're going to see a drop off because they're like, it's fixed edition. Whereas you have like these open editions, forever editions, you're not worried. You're kind of eliminating the speculation aspect of it, where you're making it just more like, hey, do you love this episode? Do you love this podcast episode? Do you love this piece of content as a whole? And can you show your affinity for that piece of content, whatever it is, whether it's a video, podcast, anything like that? And I think that is a much more interesting model for a lot of creators, because you don't have to worry about the speculation side of things. You can just continue to focus on creating that content and not trying to appease like every NFT holder because they bought a 1 of 100 and it didn't go up. Or it didn't sell out, which is like the nightmare about fixed editions, right?
Mm-hmm. I want to put a pin in this because I have a question about the way you're talking about this with your friends that are not like super crypto native, but I want to stick to the crypto native segment for a second, because I know that Pods, you made some architecture decisions about the way that you guys are doing your mints. You guys are recently on Optimism. You're using 1155s. Talk to me about the way that you started tokenizing these episodes and what that looks like today.
Yeah, so we started these on Sound, which was very well known as a music NFT platform, using 721s on ETH mainnet. And while I was doing Bankless Collectibles, we realized, one, like gas fees were a nightmare. You can't really afford to do this when people were paying 0.01, 0.02 in gas fees to mint something that was 0.03 ETH, right? Like you can't. That's just not sustainable. So transitioning from ETH mainnet natively to an L2 was definitely a big decision. Luckily, we were able to kind of sit on our hands and, somehow in like June, July, like all of the NFT activity just transitioned to L2 and no one's minting on mainnet anymore. So we got that benefit of like, by the time we had launched, a lot of the activity, NFT activity, was on L2. So we didn't have to like, make that jump, before anyone else. But obviously, yeah, that L2 migration was huge. And the other part was with the 721s, look, you're releasing this podcast once a week, right? With the 721, by the end of the year, you're going to have 52 different contracts, and managing those contracts becomes a nightmare, right? With the frequency that creators release, like videos and podcasts, there's just too frequent to have 721s. Whereas like music, even art, like you're probably releasing, a couple times a year. You're not releasing on like this strict schedule of once a week or anything like that. So you can afford like having a little bit more disparate or fragmented system. What 1155s enable is all of the tokens, all of your content can live under a single contract. And for podcasting, this is really interesting because effectively the 1155 contract acts as an on-chain RSS feed, where any other platform can just index that RSS feed or that Ethereum contract and then just populate all the episodes as they come out, right? You don't have to go to DM, someone because you deployed a new 721. You can just do it natively. You can do it once. And also on the benefits side of things, when you have 52 721s versus one 1155 contract, you're just like enabling a lot more on the benefit side of things. Like if you wanted to have a guild chat or something, you just have to input that 1155 contract once. You don't have to be like adding a new 721 contract every single time you want to where you release it and want to include those collectors into your group chat or something like that. And it can get more, interesting with like burn to redeem where, let's say you wanted to do for invest in music, you wanted to burn content to redeem and invest in music pass. With 721s, let's say you set that to 10, you have to do 10 approve and burn transactions. Whereas with an 1155, you can just do that in one because all of the tokens, all the content is living under one contract. So you kind of get a range of different benefits that we think will be really applicable in the future, and just synthesizes and streamlines a lot of the deployment process to one single contract rather than having X amount of 721 contracts. So yeah, that move to 1155s is definitely a big one. I think as a whole, they're less supported throughout the ecosystem, but the good news is that the trend is working in the right direction. People are supporting 1155s more and more. And I think we're going to see 1155s really become prominent, especially among content creators and people that are releasing new content or new NFTs very frequently, whether it is a game, whether it's a content creator, anything like that. I think that there's plenty of applications for 1155s in that realm.
And so let's go to the other side of the puzzle here, which is people who have never touched a wallet, who have never bought anything on chain before. How do you explain pods to them?
Yeah, I think right now it's definitely a little bit of a fun narrative to try and sell to people, especially like my normie friends. But effectively, I try and just say that I'm creating a platform for what I would say is like podcast collectibles is maybe the most friendly term that I've found. But I also really just try and explain the concept of like content NFTs maybe as a whole, where we're effectively just opening up a new way to monetize content and engage with those people. So I would call it, maybe if I'm like talking to my mom, I would maybe call it like a Web3 Patreon is like some parallel that we've seen work pretty well. But I think as a whole, like we're still working on the narrative that is going to really convince a lot of the mainstream people. But I think this idea of collecting, owning the content and getting upside in that creator, and more importantly, getting status with that creator, which we can talk about in a sec, is really the through line that I think is valuable, and how that culminates into a narrative that affects the mainstream is still like a work in progress. But yeah.
I want to give you a space to talk more about the status with the creator, because I'm going to take us somewhere that's a very different topic. So before I do that, why don't you talk more about like the status with the creator and why collecting helps with that relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think like one of the big things one, you get to monetize. Like that's one part of the releasing your content as NFTs. But the other part is like the analytics engagement status part. So when you release this podcast on Anchor or wherever you're doing it, you're going to get like a report, be like, fantastic, this got 10,000 downloads. 55% of them were from the US. You actually have no insights on the individuals behind who listen to this podcast. You have no idea if someone's life was changed by this podcast. You don't know if they listened to it 5 times. You don't know if it was like their first time ever listening to your podcast. You have no insights on any of the individuals, where the NFTs allow you, the individual, to express your affinity for that podcast, or express, and also just like understand your where you came into the picture. Were you like collecting the first episode, or did you just collect this most recent one for the first time ever? And understanding those audiences and the individuals that make up your audience, I think is really powerful. And with that, by releasing your content as NFTs on chain, you're building like this social graph of your biggest fans. You can see that, someone collected every single episode that we've released on chain versus someone that's only collected one. And you get this kind of like granular social graph of who your biggest fans are and how early they've supported and how much they've supported and like which episodes were their favorites. And I think that's a really powerful dimension in like content analytics that doesn't exist today, that we're only just unlocking now with these content NFTs. Right now, it's just the primitive of like putting the NFT out there, and then we're going to see more and more like insights derived from these. And we're seeing this with like Bello, Vessel is another one, couple other platforms that are really just dialing into the analytics behind NFTs and understanding your collector base, which I think is really powerful for content creators. But yeah, that is the status part, is that you can understand who your biggest fans are. Even with this episode, like I can go right now and identify, we can shout out people right now if you wanted to, of like who the biggest collectors are, for Invest in Music, right? And I think that's really powerful because you don't get that insight anywhere else, right? You're not getting it with Spotify. But like Mitchie A. Gabe, 10 items, Sebastian, 10 items, Vivid Fever Dreams, another, like these are people that we can now just identify and call out and shout out and engage with on a new level, because we understand it, because they're collecting these NFTs and they're standing out and they're becoming more than what I'm calling just like becoming more than a download or a statistic for these people. You can represent your fandom as an individual, and I think that's really powerful.
100%. I think part of the reason why the whole NFT playbook has not been feeling as exciting to me is I feel like there's a lack of design space around like tokenomics. And if we go back to some of our earlier conversation, part of the reason why I loved doing that work was that not only were we doing like airdrops, we were also thinking about the way that, tokens worked within these applications, within these systems. And I feel like in a lot of ways, there's a lot of beautiful things to be said around collecting content on chain. I mean, I echo pretty much all the sentiment that you said here. But I think one thing that I've been feeling a little deprived about has been the design space for larger tokenomic schemas to emerge when there's a consistent output of content that might not have value around it on a consistent basis. And I'm curious to hear how you think about the way that you're designing a playbook as a creator who's releasing a podcast every week versus a project, a DeFi founder project who has, it's called like Rocket Pool or something like that, like a crazy economic protocol to design around.
Yeah, I think that this game is massively open for design right now. Like I kind of talked about how you release your content on chain, it becomes like a digital trading card game, and figuring out what that game is for each and every creator is definitely the big design space. I think like one of the big ones right now that I'm really interested in and have been interested in it for a while is this burn to redeem model, where, okay, let's take Bankless or the Block or anyone else, where if I collect enough of your content and engage with it, I can burn and redeem it for a lifetime membership to your, research subscription. So Delphi, Masari, any of these people can create content consistently. And then their fans can go and collect and then burn to redeem for this, bigger piece of, reward, this bigger reward that is relevant to the content that they're consuming, but is also just, it creates a game, right? Of, I want this lifetime membership. Like you create an incentive and like there's a design there about that. So I think that that's really cool. The other one that I think is like more applicable for podcasting, before I jump to that, is like this burn to redeem for collect content, burn to redeem for some exclusive benefit, I think is really powerful for creators across the spectrum. One, because you're creating some sort of utility around collecting that content. And two, the content that gets left over accrues a collector premium, because if people actually just want to collect that content and own that content and hold it, not for the utility, but because it's valuable content. So you kind of get this dynamic of like, you're getting utility, but also accruing collector premium and understanding how much of your content that's being collected is actually just for people collecting that content. And I think that's really cool to accrue that premium once that model is kind of fleshed out. Where was I going from that? Remind me, Coop. I lost my train of thought.
I could take you somewhere else. You're basically talking about how you want to collect this content on chain, digital trading card game, etc. You were talking about music as a format, and then to podcast.
Podcasting specific, right? I think a new game for podcasting that you could start implementing today is top 3 collectors, and the first collector get a shout out in the podcast. Everyone that's collecting the podcast is listening to it, and they can now kind of compete in this game to collect the content to get their name embedded in it. And this is actually Twitch's entire business model, is people donate money to get their name on a screen for 15 seconds or 10 seconds and get the creator to say, oh, hey, thanks, Cooper, for donating. And that's it. That's the whole business model. Twitch is like massively successful off of that. And you can do the same thing with these NFTs, where you can say, hey, top 3 collectors every week, they're going to get a shout out in the intro. And now you have a competitive game for everyone that's listening. If they want to engage with you on a more deeper level, that you can go ahead and do that, and you can start competing. And that's good for you because you're getting more collects and you're monetizing your content in a better way. And you're also answering, like, the biggest thing is like, why collect? Like, why would I own this podcast NFT? Well, like, the first one is like, you can identify some of these games that you're creating. So it's like top 3 collectors are getting a shout out. You can also burn to redeem for Invest in Music Pass. You have all these kind of design spaces that you can kind of go and create that I think are really powerful.
I like that. I like that a lot. Before we close the loop on the on-chain content, on-chain media side of things, is there any other comments you want to make about current state of pods, or sort of like the ways that people can get involved today?
Yeah, so Pods is kind of rolling out slowly. We're doing launch collections with limited creators. So we're working with a handful of creators between now and the end of the year to kind of get their podcasts on chain as limited edition collectibles. We've done a couple. Obviously, Invest in Music has been a big proponent, just releasing weekly. We just did one with OP Radio. We did that demo day with C Club. We did Wizard of Daps, which is an OG crypto podcast, with Peter Pan last week, and by the time that this comes out, we'll have a new collection with Rehash, which is actually one of the OG podcast NFT people that have been releasing podcast NFTs for 2-3 years now, and is coming to our platform because we're offering a better experience. And she's excited to kind of, tap into the new features, whether it is like revenue splits or, attributing the guests into the metadata, and obviously the L2 deployment. Rehash has been minting on ETH mainnet for the past 2 years, and now it's gone to a point where it's too bad. It's like impossible to mint. So we're excited to debut Rehash on Pods this week by the time you guys are listening to this. And yeah, so exciting.
Love that. I was going to ask if you could go back and tell yourself something as the kid who was in the CU Blockchain Club today, what would you tell him?
Oh, man. Show up every day and just start contributing. And I think that was a testament to what I was doing at the time when I realized I wanted to go full time into crypto. It's just show up and keep showing up day in, day out. Don't worry about what your friends are doing, how much money they're making, anything like that. Just stay, dialed in and do you, and pursue your path. And I think that's really important for not only me, and was happy that I did that, but I think that's a piece of advice that can apply to a lot of people, is don't worry about other people. Just do you, do the thing that you want to do. And you will be rewarded if you show up every day.
I love that. And I think one big consistent theme that we've done over the years, just go to all of these IRL events. It's something that I know that we've had a lot of amazing memories at. We've traveled basically the entire world at this point, going to these conferences. What would you say for someone who's listening to this that may have never traveled to a crypto event before, who's thinking about trying to get deeper in the space, and the best way to do so today?
Yeah, I think try and find a local meetup. I remember the first crypto meetup I went to outside of CU Blockchain was the Boulder crypto meetup, and Kevin Owocki and Austin Griffith were there, and chatted with them for 2 minutes, and I was nervous as hell because I knew who they were, but those are kind of moments that are really helpful. I think as a whole, just it's important to show up to these conferences and make a name for yourself when you need to. like I remember ETH Denver 2018, like that's where I started like making a lot of the connections that I have today. Whether it was like I remember that's kind of like when our relationship really started to like bud and like grow into fruition beyond just like knowing each other from the club. I think I met like David Hoffman was like handing out MK his like articles, printed out versions of his articles for MKR research at ETH Denver 2018. Like talk about someone that like just showed up to the conference because they wanted to get involved. And I think, yeah, it's gonna suck for the first few conferences because I think I felt really alone and I didn't know a lot of people and like even you had a small network because you'd been to like some stuff before, but I remember just being there and being like not knowing a lot of people. And I think just showing up to those conferences, making that one connection, two connections every conference, because you're going to run into them again. And that connection is going to lead, the two people that you met might have two other people. And like, yeah, I think it's really important to show up to these conferences when you can at the end of the day and just make a name for yourself, especially if you're just getting started out. There's nothing bad that can happen when you go to these conferences, just show up and make a name for yourself.
Do you have an opinion on if we look at the trends that have happened in crypto today? Obviously when you and I got started, ICOs was kind of the name of the game. Then it became DeFi and then DAOs for a little bit and then NFTs. Do you have any sort of intuition or thoughts around like what the next chapter might look like for all this?
Yeah, I think like as a whole crypto industry, I think DeFi related real world assets is probably going to be pretty big. I mean, we're seeing that. I think on-chain social, Web3 social, on-chain media, kind of bucketing it all into another major category there is going to be huge. And then I had a third one, gaming. Gaming is the other third pillar that I would be like really interested in doing. Yeah, grew up as a gamer and spent a lot of my time sunk into games and had nothing to show for it. And I think if I at least had a collection of NFTs that I could sell on the open market, that'd be nice.
Do you think the form factor changes at all? Or when you talk about those topics, RWAs, on-chain social, gaming, et cetera, like what do you think the form factor is that captures the value within those ecosystems?
In what sense?
Like, do you think it's just NFTs again, or do you think that there's some evolution on it that makes it feel different from what it was in the past?
I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of interest around bonding curves with like friend tech and whatnot. And I know that has been a long time coming. I think that was like a lot of articles written in 2018 were around bonding curves and TCRs. And I think that is actually probably one of the form factors that I think is going to take off within these verticals, or at least like the on-chain media, Web3 social are like bonding curves and TCRs. TCRs are really interesting because it's a new way to curate and understand the content of any sort of list. That's not just like Web 2 metrics like views or anything. You can actually just get people's opinions on it, which I think is really interesting. And yeah, I would say TCR's bonding curves are something that's really interesting and unique. That seems to be enabling the Web3 social on-chain media paradigm.
And then fun fact question here. What was one of your favorite memories you had from you and I traveling the world over the course of the last few years?
Oh, you want me to tell that story, Coop?
There's some of them here. You can give me.
Oh, man.
Yeah, go ahead. Go for it, actually.
So me and Coop, 2018, broke as shit, traveling Asia. We're in Indonesia. We were just in Bali. I had gotten water damage on my laptop and it completely shit the brick. And this is like our only source of like life was our laptops. That was like the only way I was going to get back home was if I had access to a laptop and was able to like make a living somehow. And we ended up being in Lombok off the coast in Indonesia. And we went on a mission to go get a laptop in some random remote village. And we'd rented 2 mopeds, one for each of us to drive on up. It was about an hour drive there and back. And halfway on the way up, we're going through this we're in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, Indonesia. There's nothing. And we're cruising through this little village, and Coop's about 50 feet in front of me, and just starts wobbling on his moped. And this man just crashes straight into a tree in the middle of this Indonesian village and just wraps it. And I genuinely thought I saw Coop just die. I was just holy fuck, what just happened? This whole village comes running out, be like, oh, hospital, hospital, hospital. Coop, probably minorly concussed at this point, is getting up, getting his little moped out of the fucking ditch, and it's no, I'm okay. And we get on up. And he's like, all right, I'm fine. And we drive and we go get our laptop, we return, and Coop never touches a motorbike ever again in his history.
Hell no. Hell no. After that moment, I was only on the back of those motorbikes. I remember shortly after that, I was driving, we went to see like a temple or something like that. And it was that crazy windy road all the way to the top. And you were just ripping around every corner.
I was just cutting traffic.
I fully thought I was going to die.
It was good times. I mean, yeah. I think this ties back into the or like the conference game is like try and travel with your friends to these conferences because, you know, it's an epic time. And I think like some of the best memories that I have is like a lot of like the trips that we've done over the years, talking to crypto people and hanging out with people and all that.
Yeah, and I just say the perspective too of, you know, there was a solid 4 or 5 months there when you and I were just sleeping on cardboard boxes at hostels for like $3 a night. You know what I mean? And I think it's easy now to like look back on all of the gains that we've made in crypto and just be like thinking of life differently. But I would say to anyone who's kind of in a, you know, a phase right now where you're trying to figure out your next chapter, just try and like send it somewhere abroad and just get that perspective. Because I know for me at least, like when we were out there in Cambodia and Thailand and all these places, like I still had such like a drive and such like a chip on my shoulder because I know that we were at these amazing places in the world, but I just wanted to do so much more for it. And I think that you and I being able to go and do that together, it really just like channeled this energy that we had no clue. I don't want to speak for you. I had no clue what I was doing at that point in my life, but I knew that I was going to figure something out. I think just putting myself in that desperate situation like really allowed that to come to fruition in a very meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that like wholeheartedly. I don't think I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I was on the right path. And like, I just had to stick on this path and keep working at it. And obviously have you and so many other people to attribute like all the success that we've had over the years. I mean, I think, it's been a wild journey. And I always think back about like 2018 Asia, like I had like $200 to my name and like that was it. And it was like driving to spend that $200 on a laptop so I could get home, you know? Very, I think, shaping memories for us as a whole.
I think in a lot of ways emotionally, I've definitely been feeling a lot of those same sentiments that I was feeling during, you know, the 2018, 2019 bear market today. And just to kind of like quantify that more, it's kind of like we know we're on the right path, or at least I have a belief that I'm on my right path. But in terms of how that actually comes to life, it's very weird when we're in these phases in crypto where there's not like one thing that's working that everyone is kind of piling onto. It's kind of this middle ground where there's not quite a clear meta that's emerged yet. It seems like it's right around the corner. You think you're early to something, but there's not a lot of like alpha to capitalize on. Like, how do you feel about that?
No, I think that's like such a good point because right now it's like, I think the first time in crypto where it's not one thing that's going to pop off. It feels like it's a multiple, or like we have increase the surface area of like crypto that there are so many different verticals that, you know, can pop off and do really well and like are probably going to do really well in this next cycle. And it's not just ICOs in 2017 and even 2021. Like we saw like a DeFi one and an NFT. So we went from one kind of bull market of just ICOs to two bull markets of like DeFi and NFTs. And now I think like that can just multiply into the next bull run where, you know, we're going to see multiple sectors do really well and just experience, substantial growth, and also see net new things that just didn't exist today. That's also going to just have amazing, insane growth. So I think it's really exciting to be in crypto, and there's plenty of design space and like avenues for someone that's new here to go down. And, you know, whether you're financially minded or like a collector or anything like this, I think that there's so much more opportunity in crypto right now than, 2017, 18, it was like ICOs were it, and then ICOs died, and then there was absolutely nothing, and we just had to like scramble. I'm pretty sure there was a phase for like 3 to 4 months where we were like slanging security tokens, a security token, the next big thing, and just like, you kind of go through those trial and errors and understand what's going to work, what's not. But I think right now crypto's in a great spot where there's so many avenues that are about to open up or do really well, that it's not just one specific vertical. So more and more.
Do you think those same generational wealth opportunities exist for people who are new to the space? Like if you go back to who you were, like let's say you're a senior coming out of college, right? Like at that point in time, we were coming out 2017, ETH was just getting started. ETH was like $100, ICOs were just taking off, et cetera. What do you think you'd do if you're senior in college trying to get into crypto today?
I think to answer the question of is there more wealth creation opportunities 100%. I think they're going to be entirely net new. I think if I was a senior today in college, I think one thing that's nice is that there's a lot more like well-established companies in the space today than there were, 5 years ago when like I remember like looking at jobs and it was like Consensus was like the only place that would hire like a non-technical person. Anything else was like ICO projects that raise money and like weren't actually established. I mean, now you have, so many amazing crypto startups that you can go and work at, whether it is like a small one or like a well-established one. I think that there's more opportunity on that front. But then I think if you're more of like a freelance independent person, like I think same playbook still applies. Start writing, start, creating content. You get a double-edged sword there of being able to learn and understand and research, and also you get to publish and like build a reputation for yourself. And I think if you're a non-technical person, like that is like the best place to start. And it's not going to be like first blog you publish is going to get 1 million. Like it's go and publish 30 of them and tell me at the end of it that you're not in a better spot than you were before.
I mean, I think this is a good segue into this is the first time I'm talking about it, but basically the last week or two, I've just been chatting with my team, and I think we're really going to try and figure out this whole short form content game. It's something that I've been putting off for a very long time and trying to say that, you only need 100 super fans, you only need 100 collectors, whatever it might be, and just kind of writing off this whole Web 2 world as it's been coined in the past. But I'm just realizing now that all attention on the internet is basically revolving around your ability to produce high quality short form content. And I think whether you're an artist or if you're a podcast creator, if you're not able to grow your audience using the traditional channels, nothing's going to matter because this space is not growing at a rate that allows you to sustain yourself unless you have something that you can bring to the table. And so I think it's relevant to this conversation because this new, I'm just recognizing that you can't forget about traditional audiences. You can't forget about wanting to grow an audience. And I think we were very fortunate that, at least for myself, and I think for you as well, when we started to grow an audience on Twitter, that all came on the back of the fact that crypto was cool and exciting to talk about. The reality is that now it is not cool and exciting to talk about. And for the most part, it's very difficult for you to grow a brand and to grow an audience as someone who's predominantly talking about crypto. And so now what I'm trying to figure out is what is the strategy and the playbook that allows you to develop a genuine fan base outside of the fact that it happens to be on-chain, and then use the on-chain rails as sort of the foundation to tie the glue together, but not be reliant on that to build your audience in the first place.
100%. I think no one publishing your content on chain does not compete with the distribution that you get in Web 2. Like you should be using Web 2 for distribution, Web 3 for deeper level engagement, I guess it would be maybe the way to describe it, or like building your deeper community is where like the on-chain aspect thrives. I think casting the wide net, the distribution is definitely still a Web 2, play, right? Like you want to be publishing on YouTube, you want to be going on TikTok, all that sort of stuff. So if you want to cast your audience wide, I think 100% Web 2. If you want to go deep on like your audience, I think it's a Web 3 mechanism. And I think trying to figure out the balance between those for media companies today, I think is going to be really interesting. And for, creators as a whole is going to be really interesting. But I think it's not one or the other. I think it's definitely a balance of both and understanding the strengths and weaknesses in each.
Yeah, and if I had to give my opinion on like the evolution of all this, I think that NFTs were very promising because it introduced a new market dynamic to creative art. So let's call it digital art, let's call it music, let's call it podcasts, whatever it might be. Being able to collect work digitally, I think was a very novel experience. But what I'm not fully convinced yet is you mentioned like bonding curves and TCRs. I do think when it comes to creating long-term markets for content in general, I do question whether or not NFTs are the right form factor for it. Because to find an example here, you mentioned you found Jack Harlow really on, you found Russ very early on. You could buy an open edition record of those artists. Let's call it a forever edition or an open edition mint. There's nothing that's necessarily going to accrue value back to that mint, but what it does do is it gives you social status. And so what I think I'm trying to segment in my mind is the difference between where the financial market occurs and where like the speculation occurs versus where the social signaling occurs. Because you can get a lot of merit out of buying a forever edition or an open edition of a Jack Harlow record that lets you comment on it, that shows that you bought it on September 2020, etc. But is that same open edition going to be the thing that goes from $1 to $1,000 when Jack Harlow blows up? I don't know if that's the case. And so I think where my mind's currently at is recognizing that it doesn't have to be binary. I think that a lot of the times in crypto, if an NFT is minted as a one of one, if it's minted as an open edition here, you can't make another tokenized representation of it. I think where my mind at now is recognizing that I believe NFTs will evolve into being the social layer of the internet, which is how you signal around like the posts that you like, the people you follow, the content that you collect. But I think the gap to zoom in more on now is around like the speculative market of like how does content actually create a meaningful up curve associated with it. And I'm curious to hear if you have any thoughts about like that thought process.
Yeah, I think the open editions, what's interesting, if you put them timed, it's really just measuring, it's perfectly measuring the demand for that piece of work in that moment in time. And I think that that is like enough to provide that upside for creators. I think my one thing is like bonding curves, especially for like content. Like I don't want to over financialize music or like any sort of media or anything. So that's maybe like my hesitation around bonding curves, is like it really does over financialize it and drive like a lot of the speculatory kind of perspective into the media. And I think that that might, the result of that is maybe not ideal from a content creation perspective. Like I think it's really interesting to create content that's worth collecting, but creating or like collecting that content just for financial upside, I think is like not the ideal outcome for anyone. So I think, yeah, I don't know what the answer is right now. I think open editions could serve as that vehicle. Bonding curves could play a role in some aspect of it, but I think, trying to find the balance between all of these is really interesting. And the nice thing is that there's a whole industry kind of focus on experimenting in this front, and people are going to identify best practices, over enough experimentation. So I think it's really powerful to just like look at that as a whole. But yeah.
I don't think it's one or the other, but I guess what I would add on to that is like, yes, I do agree that only speculating for speculating's sake is not enough to give something value. But all of these pieces of content on the internet do make money. You know what I mean? Like, especially as these posts go viral and they have millions of views, millions of likes, or whatever it might be, the creator is capturing value on that. And I know it sounds like a little Black Mirror-y, but I don't think it's far-fetched to think that there's a world where like every piece of content has a dollar sign somewhere tied to it, whether it's like above a certain threshold or something like that. If you could say like this video's price is $10, this video's price is $50, and the difference between the $50 one is that it has 50,000 likes and the one that's $10 has like 10,000 likes. I think that there's some opportunity to kind of create a relationship between the performance of the content and what its like quote unquote price is, as by virtue of however much money it's made from whether it's the TikTok creator program or the Instagram creator program or the amount of streams on Spotify. It's like all of this content on the internet is making money in some way, shape, or form. But I don't think that there's currently a way for you as a patron of that content to bet on the long-term success of it. And I also think, to your point, there should be a way that if I don't want to play around in like the speculation market of like over financialization, I can just like this thing, collect it, and not have to worry about all these other things. I just wonder if we've maybe gone too far down the direction of like something needing to have a floor price that's valuable or something being at zero. And if there's a way to separate the social piece of it, of like I can just collect this thing for free to like it. But if I want to be, in the more degen mindset of like gambling on content, maybe there's like a different world that exists in. And I'm excited to see teams and projects that are kind of playing around with that more.
Yeah, 100%. I think all content being on chain with the dollar sign, I think is inevitable, to be honest. I think that will happen. I think the mechanism for that price discovery of the dollar sign is up in the air, right? And that right now is like very primitive in the sense of we just have open editions, and if you do like a forever edition, like it's $1 forever, and that's how the discovery of the price is. And then we have like really interesting like over financialized, ways to do it where the amount of people that collect it is directly tied to a bonding curve. So like the price discovery is directly tied to demand. I hope that there is a world kind of what you're envisioning where it's like a happy medium between the two, where I can just go and collect something because I like it and love it and not have to worry about the financial speculation or be priced out because there is speculation on that piece of content. Like if I just want to like it for $1, like I can go and get it. And just because it's really valuable doesn't mean I can't own it.
And let me say it a different way. And I know that we're running a little long here, but I think it's an interesting topic. if you want to speculate in crypto right now, you're basically going on Uniswap and you're buying the most degenerate shitcoins that you could ever imagine. Like the things that have the craziest ticker symbols that are just like complete meme pump and dumps, etc.
Yeah.
And that's really fun. Don't get me wrong. Like I've played that game before. I love that game. I think that there's so much like enticing elements of it. But what I think gets tough for me is like if I want to like be early to something in crypto right now, it feels like the only place to do that is on like shitcoin casinos and like shitcoin roulettes. And I just really wish that there was a world where you could actually put that same level of time, energy, and attention into like content that's meaningful, art that's meaningful, like things that have historical and cultural relevance versus right now, the entirety of like betting in crypto is buying a shitcoin that got launched yesterday and pumps to 20 million market cap and then goes back down to zero versus being able to have that same ethos and that same sentiment around a song that's extremely valuable in someone's life or like a piece of art or like a TikTok or something like that. Like I feel like there's so many other ways to just introduce these market dynamics that I think I've just been trying to figure out like how do we get from only shit coins to like there actually being a collective sentiment that like there's something valuable about being able to bet on where culture is going.
Yeah. I think the shit answer there is like time and experimentation, right? Will get us there. And I think the reason for that answer is because where we were 3 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, wherever, to today, like that world that you're envisioning, Coop, is like so much more true. And like you can actually go spend time and like go and collect songs and like maybe the ROI and like shitcoin gambling, like attention that you're looking for isn't there yet, but like you can do it today and you can spend time and like people are spending all day, listening and collecting music and other sorts of content. People are just browsing Zora all day and just trying to find like the coolest piece of content. So I think we're moving in that direction. I think we just need a little bit more time, more experimentation, and Gary Gensler to shut the F up.
It's just so removed. I think that's the thing that's frustrating to me is like the type of content that you collect on chain right now is so removed from what's actually popular in the mainstream culture. And that just like frustrates me a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's part of it, like, is getting creators on chain, right? And getting them to understand why it's valuable to put their content on chain. Like, Joe Rogan putting his podcast on chain should happen, right? Like he has no insight on who his biggest fans are. And I'm sure, he could make a crazy killing by just like opening up that mechanism. Like for what it's worth, like Bankless was on track over, I think it was like $500,000 a year, which was like about 20 to some 30% of their sponsorship revenue. And this is off limited edition, 100 editions, limited edition, right? So they were able to make, generate, $500,000 a year just off of 100 people max, right? And that is so powerful, and being able to understand that, I think, is really, really interesting. But at the end of the day, it's just like, education, getting creators to understand why publishing on chain is as valuable as publishing online. And that's the gap.
It's almost like paradoxical because the reason why I want to see these markets emerge is not to be able to make money off of it. I think it just introduces a new level of social signaling that we haven't seen before.
Right.
Like I think the behavior that I've noticed time and time again from ICOs to DeFi to NFTs was that people just want to show that they were early to something, and when they make money on the back of it, that's a way to tangibly show that you were early because you bought something for a cheap price and you sold it for a higher price. And now no one can argue with you that you were early to something because you have a receipt that literally shows the cost and the output. And I guess that's kind of like where I want to get with all this stuff is like, I agree with everything that you're saying. I think I've just been very feeling stuck when I talk to creators about like putting their music on chain right now because they don't understand culturally why it makes sense for them to do so. And I think everything you said about like, you can see who your biggest fans are, et cetera, all those things are valid. But I feel like it's something that these creators have been pitched for so long at this point. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like this intention of like, get closer to your fans, build a deeper relationship with your community, start a community. That's like the pitch that I feel like companies have used for the last 10 years as like tech companies about why this matters. And I'm really just trying to figure out like, what is the novelty that makes being on chain exciting in this next chapter? Because if we're just using a lot of the same narratives that artists have heard in the generation past, I don't think it's going to make it an exciting place to be in the first place. Yeah.
And I think like the first stab at that is like the ownership of the work, right? All those previous mediums that existed before, when you get pitched, it's like, it's more of a one-way relationship where the fan is like, I just feel like it's not a fully, synergistic relationship where it's like one of them is getting something that the other's not. And these NFTs kind of even that playing field where you get to contribute, you get to, have that patronage to that creator, and you get to own that work in return. The terms of owning that work is up in the air and up to the creator to determine, but that aspect, and then on top of like earning that status, I think is really the important piece of it, right? Collect, own the work, earn the status. And I think that part didn't exist before, where you don't have that ownership piece. You can like donate and earn status, but you don't actually have you don't have that middle step. And I think that is where we have to figure out how to appropriately get people to understand.
Yeah. And I'll make one last comment on this. I feel like a lot of the issue with where it stands today is that case is compelling for artists who don't currently have like a real following. I feel like it starts to flip once you actually are really successful. So take into account a Taylor Swift, a Drake, someone like this, like they have too many people trying to get in touch with them that they almost need to create separation from it. I feel like a lot more of the merit comes down to like the way in which fans identify status amongst themselves, much more than like how they tangibly connect with the artist. Because at a certain point, it's just impossible. You know what I mean?
Like, yeah, I think if you had like a leaderboard of like Taylor Swift's biggest fans index, or like sorted by NFTs collected, like that game, and like Taylor like signed it as like an approved leaderboard, like the Taylor Swift fans would go nuts for that, just on like not even getting closer to Taylor, but to be like, hey, I'm a bigger fan than you, Coop, like look at me, I'm ranked 50, you're ranked 70. And I think that's very true. Like the interpersonal games, or like the inter-community games, status games, I think is as powerful as the creator level status games.
Right.
But you just need that community there first, right?
Lucas, I could talk to you forever, man. I got a haircut that I got to jet to, and so unfortunately that's going to be me hard pivoting to the end of this episode. Why don't we wrap it up with you giving a quick closing thoughts here, summarize our conversation, and tell people where they can stay up with all your work to date.
Yeah, I think Onchain is a new online media set to thrive in this new era. Publishing your media on-chain is as valuable as publishing it online, not from a distribution perspective, but from a monetization, and really as you kind of are understanding the engagement level and the status level of media. So I think as a whole, this on-chain media wave is coming. I think we're starting to see the early players emerge from this space. And if you are interested in getting involved, check out pods.media, where we are building a platform to help tokenize and publish podcasts on-chain. We're working with Invest in Music and a handful of other awesome creators to start rolling out podcasts that are live week in and week out. So collect this episode. Maybe Coop will give you a shout out on the next one if you're the top collector, and we can start playing that status game as like a 0 to 1.
Why don't you give yourself a little personal shout out here too, because your Twitter is definitely something worth following as well.
Yeah, you can also follow me on Twitter at 0x_Lucas. I'm shadow banned, so you literally have to go to that exact URL in order to find me. Thanks, Elon, for all that. So.
Well, what I would say, man, is it's been a hell of a journey. Like I said, I'm sure that we could cover way more on this episode, but I just want to say thank you for giving us a platform to put our media on chain. It's been a hell of a journey for us so far, and I'm very excited for what's to come. So without further ado, one hell of an episode, Lucas, and I look forward to keeping this conversation going.
Absolutely, Coop. Great to sync up with you and share the story a little bit. I appreciate you having me.
All right, guys. We'll see you all next week. Everyone have a good week.